Welcome to our final presentation for Chapter 1. And in this presentation, we're going to discuss short-term investments, cash investments, or just often referred to as cash, and get them out of the way because they're really not that exciting. There's not that much to them, but they are important if we need the money in the short term. Right. If we don't need this money in the short term, if this is for a long-term financial goal, then this is not a good place to put your money, dear students. It's not going to go down, but it ain't going to go up very quickly. In fact, it's going to take a long time to make any kind of money. So let's get started on slide 55. Interest on short-term investments, it comes in two forms. The first form is the one we're normally used to, a savings account. We're getting 1%, 2%. That's called the stated rate of interest or the nominal rate. We have $100, and next year, if it's to 2%, we get $102. And you pay taxes on that $2 in a savings account. The other method, which we're not too familiar with, but when we enter the world of short-term investments, in the investment world, we want to learn how to understand how these work, and that's the discount basis. I don't like the term discount. We use it a lot in finance just to confuse people, I think. Basically, you're buying it for less than it's going to mature at. It's a method of earning interest on a security by purchasing it at a price below its redemption value. And the difference is the interest earned. The interest accrues, not a cruise on a ship, but ACCRUES. It grows, that's an accounting term, on the investment. So these are treasury bills, corporate paper, commercial paper, but later, we'll discuss these later. But for example, you purchase a security now for $4,800 that will be redeemed for $5,000 in 10 months. Your interest would be $200. And you might think, well, why do they do this? Why? Because it makes it so much easier to be able to trade these, because remember, they're securities. They're tradable. So if you buy it for $4,800 and after 5 months, you need the money, you don't want to wait for the 10 months, you can turn around and sell it, and the price would be around $4,900. You see what's happening? As it gets closer and closer and closer to the maturity date, it gets closer and closer to the redemption value. So for the industry, this is great. I don't have to hold on to this security for 10 months. I could, if I need to, sell it beforehand, and I will have earned some interest, but not all the interest because I did not hold it until maturity. It makes sense. A little tricky at first, but no, it makes perfect sense. Slide 56. Risks of short-term investments. Wait a minute, Payano. You told me there weren't any. Well, that's true. The risk of default of a capital loss, that's negligible. It's either guaranteed by an agency of the federal government or pretty darn close. But there are risks with every investment. And in the case of short-term investments, you risk losing purchasing power, sometimes called inflation risk, because short-term investments barely keep up with inflation over the long term. Sometimes they do better, other times they do a whole lot worse than inflation. And there's a risk of what is called lost opportunity cost. Now, what does that mean? When I take an economics class, it's the alternative you could have chosen that would have done a whole lot better. Let's read. Unless your time horizon is very short, there are several investment alternatives, almost all of which will give you a better return, rate of return on your money over the long term, right? We know next year stocks might drop 20, 30%, but over the long term, assuming the world doesn't end, you should do a whole lot better. And if you remember the graph from the previous, right, the stocks have done really well, bonds have done okay, But cash instruments, not very good at all. So no investment is perfect. Every investment has advantages. Every investment has disadvantages. Every investment has rewards, and every investment has risks. Yeah. Now, repeat after me. There is no such thing as a risk-free investment. It just doesn't exist. You wish it were. You wish it were true, but it's not. Slide 57. Let's take a look at some of the types of short-term investments. Demand deposit accounts. You've heard of savings accounts. They used to be called passbook savings accounts because they give you a little book that looks like a passport. And some of them still do. Oh, the kids love it. They come in there and they stomp. They get the stamp and just stamp on it. At a credit union, they call them savings accounts, but legally they're different. They're share accounts, but nobody calls them that. Everyone calls them a savings account. Checking accounts now, some earn interest. They used to be called negotiable order of withdrawal, and you can go into the history of how this evolved, but basically they're checking accounts that pay interest, not very much. And then we talked about money market mutual funds very quickly in our previous presentations. We're going to discuss them more in detail in this presentation. But when money market mutual funds came about, the banks and the credit unions looked around and said, hey, we can do that too. And so they create money market deposit accounts. They don't call it that. They just call it the money market. The difference is if it's at a bank or a credit union, it is guaranteed by the full faith and credit by the U.S. government. Now, it's not unlimited. It's up to $250,000 per bank. So, most of us are not going to have to worry about it. The funds, they're called demand accounts because the funds are available upon demand. Now, if you walk into a bank and ask for your $77,000 or whatever you have in the bank in cash, they're not going to be too happy. In fact, they're probably going to tell you to come back tomorrow because they don't have that much cash. They're going to try to get you to create a treasurer's check or cashier's check or whatever. But yeah, you can get your money. You worried about the bank? Don't worry about the banks. The banks there's a few banks that do really stupid things, and then there's some tricks that some of these traders, speculators do to try to knock the banks down one by one. And so there's talk about exempting banks from this trick that and we'll talk about it later on when we get to the very end of the semester. It's called shorting. It's dangerous. Don't do it. And we'll discuss it way at the end of the semester. Okay, CDs. Walk into a bank, walk into a credit union, look around, and you'll see a poster that says, check out our CD rate, certificates of deposits. Folks, they're just fancy savings accounts. They're often called time deposit accounts because you must leave them on deposit for a specified period. 7 days, 6 months, 2, 3, 5 years. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get your money back, but they're going to penalize you. They're going to slap your wrist and take some of your money away from you if you withdraw them early. Again, they're insured to that same $250,000 per investor per bank. There are also what we call broker CDs. Now, these are sold by brokerage firms. They normally offer higher yields, and you can sell them prior to maturity without incurring a penalty. But why are they paying more? Why are brokers out to sell these things? Right, there's more risk. Now, don't worry, they're still guaranteed that they're going to pay you, and they do. But I have no experience whatsoever with these. I don't even know anybody who's ever bought them. The brokerage firm I've worked at, I've never seen them. No one's ever sold them. So they're there. Check them out. Especially if you're a CD investor like Gene in the listen to the interview. Now, you have to be careful with CDs because they roll over automatically if you don't redeem them. They give you 2 hours on Tuesday afternoon from 2:30 to 4. No, they give you 2 weeks. Come on, what do you want to do with your CD? And if you don't, tell them what to do with it, they will roll it over for another 6 months, 2 years, or whatever. You can specify that you want the proceeds to be automatically rolled into your checking account or savings account, and you should. Now, we talked about money market accounts at banks. Well, the precursor, before the money market accounts showed up at banks and credit unions, the mutual fund companies created what are called money market mutual funds. Now, these are mutual funds, so they work the same way we talked about in the second presentation, where you pool your money together, but they invest the investors' money exclusively in short-term securities. And we're going to see which ones are coming up. They're treasury bills and commercial paper, corporate paper, commercial bankers' acceptance notes. Very, very safe. Virtually all brokerage firms, mutual fund companies offer these. Unlike the money market deposit accounts from the bank or the credit union, these are not guaranteed. But don't worry, they're still considered virtually risk-free. If there's ever a default, and there never has been, but there has been times when they lose money, and folks, when they lose money, they lose a penny. Watch the presentation on short-term securities. You'll see that money market mutual funds are designed to keep $1 as their net asset value. In other words, they're meant to, you might have heard this stable coin stuff when it comes to cryptocurrencies. Same idea. These are meant to stay $1. If they ever screw up, and it's very rare, last time was 2008, and then you have to go back to like 25 years before that, it's called breaking the buck. They go from $1 to 99 cents. And when that happens, the whole world stands up and looks like, what did you do? And they go, oops, we're sorry. Can we put some of our money into the money market account, money market mutual funds? And the regulators have to step in, because you're never allowed to do that. That's the first thing they tell you when you get in the industry. Don't you ever commingle your money with your clients. And if they can't do it, if they're in such trouble that they can't do it, their competitors will do it. Now, why would they do that? Because they don't want people to think that the money market mutual fund is not stable, is not guaranteed. So even though it's not explicitly guaranteed, there's unless the world ends, in which case it doesn't matter where your money is. In fact, the last time it happened in 2008, people started to get really worried because the wheels of the economy were falling off. And the Federal Reserve Bank, the knight on shining armor, came to the rescue and said, don't worry, we will guarantee all money market mutual funds for 6 months. And because people were really starting to think, maybe I should take my money out of the money market mutual fund, put it in the bank. They did that for 6 months, and then they renewed it for another 6 months. And by September 2009, people were still shell-shocked, but they weren't as worried anymore. They often will give you checks, but not so much anymore. Now you just link your bank account with the money market mutual fund, and you can just transfer money from the money market mutual fund to your bank account. Cool. So if you are so inclined, check out Breaking the Buck on the InfernalNet, and you will see plenty of articles and the like about the last time this happened in 2008. Now, there used to be these things called Series EE savings bonds. They're still around, but they're all electronic. And it used to be that that you'd buy them for your grandchild or your niece or nephew when they were born for $50, and then 20, 30 years later they're worth $100 or whatever. It's called accrual. It's the discount method, basically, right? And people would put them in a drawer somewhere and completely forget about them. Well, yeah, don't. In fact, check out your drawers. Talk to your folks if you're 18, 19, 20, or even if you're older. Because if you use these for qualified higher education purposes, they are free from federal income taxes. They're also free from state and local income taxes, but that's because the feds can't tax the state and local governments, and the state and local governments can't tax the feds. We'll discuss this throughout the semester when we get the bonds. So check out. Maybe you do have some. Talk to your folks, grandparents, whatever. But again, they're all electronic now, so I guess you just give them a card and say, here's your code. And where do you buy them? TreasuryDirect.gov, which is one of our assignments for Chapter 1, which we'll discuss in a bit here. There are two others, one being phased out, and I think by 2024, I think it is, they'll all be gone. The Series HH, they pay interest twice a year. They are issued at face value, so they use the nominal, the stated rate of interest. They're getting phased out. The ones that made a big splash in 2022 were the Series I savings bonds, inflation indexed. They're guaranteed to outpace inflation, but not by much. But when inflation peaked last year, 2022, in about October or so, at almost 9%, 8 point something or other, they became very, very popular. And everybody started to learn about TreasuryDirect.gov and complained bitterly because it's not the worst website. It's not the best website, okay? It's not, it's not Amazon or somebody else's website like that, but it's not bad. And your job is to dig through this thing and find some good information. And the information is not as important as the process. The process is more important. There's a maximum purchase of $30,000 per year, and people were, maybe that's gone down. I thought I heard it was, I should check. Let me write that down. I thought I heard it had gone down to 10,000. Let me check. Where am I going to write this down? Here, write that down here. See, I'm learning on the job here, folks. Don't do this at home, kids. I think it went down to $10,000. It was 30 and now it's 10. Yeah, they became celebrities in 2022, but now they're back down to subdued nature. Slide 62. Here's the biggie, folks. Treasury bills, T-bills. These are obligations of the United States Treasury. They're sold at a discount and redeemed at face value. You'll see some examples of these in the presentation on short-term securities that we would do in the face-to-face class, but we do it separate here. And you're going to look them up. You're going to go to TreasuryDirect.gov and find the current 1 month, 3 month, 6 month returns. You buy them at a discount, and then you can hold them till maturity, or you could turn around and sell them to somebody else, and the value accrues. It grows until the maturity date. They are generally regarded as the safest of all investments. Remember the risk-free rate of return? Right, they use typically the 3-month Treasury bill return as the current risk-free rate of return. Again, the feds can't tax the states can't tax the feds, so you are free from state and local income tax, but you still have to pay federal income tax. And so check out TreasuryDirect.gov. It is actually not a very bad website at all. It's pretty darn powerful. The biggest, important, coolest thing about this website is that you get to pay the same price that the big boys and girls, you get the same return that the big boys and girls on Wall Street get, which is very cool. And I think I said something about this in the assignment commentary. I happened to meet the project director in Mexico City who created CETES Directo, right? CETES Directo, which is basically TreasuryDirect.gov for Mexicans. And he said, hey, yeah, we basically stole TreasuryDirect.gov and used it for our currency. Very cool. So check it out. Now, commercial paper, corporate, what a silly name. Well, if you're a company of great import, you're big enough, you can just go out to the investment community and say, hey, we're Walmart. We need a $90 million or $100 million loan for 90 days or 30 days or 180 days. And the world will look at you and say, well, okay, you're Walmart. Yeah, we'll trust you. And so these are short-term unsecured promissory notes, sometimes it's called IOUs, issued by corporations with very high credit standings. Yeah, well, we trust Walmart. We think they're going to be in business 60 days or 90 days from now. And again, they're sold at a discount similar to Treasury bills. By keeping the maturity less than 1 year, they don't have to go through this rigorous registration process with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And it's not cheap, too. It costs a lot of money. This is a very cheap way for them to borrow money in the short term. Now, here's the kicker. How come we don't hear about these things very often? They are sold typically in denominations of $100,000. And they don't want you to buy just one, folks. They want you to buy, 5 million of the darn things. That would be 10 times 50 of them, right? 5 million. And so who usually buys these? Right, the institutional investors. This is what's inside the money market mutual fund. So when you see the presentation, you're going to see a lot of them have Treasury bills inside the money market mutual fund because they have millions, billions of dollars to invest. So you and I, in the assignment, I ask you to see if you can find some quotes on commercial paper. And you're going to find it's not easy. And some of you are going to find something that you think is a quote for commercial paper, but it turns out it really isn't. But that's okay. It's not important. What is important is the process. Just because people who have that kind of money are either professionals in the industry, they have their own systems, or they're so filthy rich they have a private broker who takes care of them. And because you walk into a brokerage firm here in the South Bay, Chula Vista, Bonita, and or wherever, and you say, "I'd like to get a quote on corporate paper," they're going to go, "Wah!" They're going to think you're a multimillionaire, and then when they find out it's for Introduction to Investments class at Southwestern, they might go, "Get out of here." But they shouldn't. They should really think of you as a potential future client and treat you well. But they're probably going to say, we don't really have clients that buy these things either. Slide 64. Say you're not as big as Walmart, right? You're a smaller company, but you're still pretty big. But you can't really go to the investment community and say, "Hey, we're such and such. We build these systems that are sent over to Japan or whatever, South Africa." Nobody wants to talk to you. So you go to one of the big banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, and you say, "I need a short-term loan. I want to do some international." It's for international trade. Here's our financials. The bank's going to do their due diligence. They're going to see what your income statement and balance sheet and cash flow statement are like, and they'll say, "Okay, yeah, we'll lend it to you at this amount," and you are the recipient then of bankers' acceptance notes. So Wells Fargo is the name that is on well, it's not paper anymore, it's all electronic, but it's backed by the bank. So you get a certain amount of these things, and then you have to pay back the full amount. So they're sold at a discount, like Treasury bills, like commercial paper, and they don't usually pay as well because banks are banks. How do you know a bank is making money? Their doors are open, but you as the borrower are paying a higher interest. Who's getting rich off of these? Right, the banks, of course. How do you know a bank is making money? Their doors are open. And these are usually 30, 60, 90 days. And again, what's the kicker? Minimum denomination is $100,000. So you and I are not normally in the market for bankers' acceptance notes. Slide 65. Okay, Payano, which short-term investment is for me? Well, as we just said, commercial paper, corporate paper, bankers' acceptance notes are usually only suitable for institutional investors. Savings bonds make cute gifts for newborns, but not so much anymore because you don't get a bond in your hand. It's all electronic. Many investors will purchase T-bills, treasury bills, directly from the treasury, which is cool because, again, as we said, you're going to get, normally you buy these things, especially if you only bought one of them, right? A broker is not going to give you a very good price, right? Well, the treasury gives you the same price as somebody who bought $5 million worth of the darn stuff. CDs, I'm not a big fan of CDs. They're fine if you know you're not going to need the money until maturity, but if all of a sudden you need the money, they're going to penalize you. Not so with money market mutual funds, money market deposit accounts. And the cool thing, and maybe the uncool thing, about money market mutual funds and money market deposit accounts is the interest rate fluctuates, whereas a CD is fixed, which is great if interest rates are high and you want to lock in that interest rate, but it's also not so great if interest rates are going up. Well, what will the company, what will the bank or the credit union do? They will often give you what's called a bump. And that's exactly what they call it. You locked in your money for a year. Well, in the middle of the year, interest rates rise. You go to the bank, you go to the credit union, you say, "Well, I'd like to bump up my interest rate," and they'll bump it up to the current rate at that day. They usually give you one time to do this, maybe two. I believe, this is certainly what I use, but everyone's different, right? I believe that most investors who are relatively savvy and do their research, look at the options, like the money market mutual fund, simply because they're so convenient. They're incredibly convenient. Every bank, every credit union, brokerage firm, mutual fund company offers them. But many uninformed investors still use a savings account from a bank. I talk to people this was quite some time ago, but somebody had $500,000 sitting in a savings account. And I'm just thinking that banker is licking her chops. She's turning around and lending that money out to somebody at 16%. But hey, if that's what makes them feel comfortable, if they need the money for they're going to buy another piece of property or whatever. But this is a retirement account, and you still got 25 years to go until retirement. Well, they need to take this class, right? Yeah. So here, it's time for the discussion on the emergency fund debate. There's a wonderful book called The Wealthy Barber, and I kind of agree with him on this count. I don't agree that you should have 6 months, a year's worth of earnings in a savings account, well, they're paying more than 0.1% now, to maybe 1%, 2%, whatever. But assuming you have a steady job, and if you were to lose your job, you'd be fairly able to start a new job soon enough. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you should have $17.87 in your checking account, okay? But I just don't believe you should have that much money in a low-paying savings account. And everyone's different. If you're a salesperson, you're self-employed, you get laid off often, well, yeah, you need a serious emergency fund. Think about the mortgage brokers now who were making tons of money because interest rates were so low for so long, and now they're sucking air because interest rates have gone up and people are just not refinancing their 3.5%, 3% loan. Yeah. So everyone's different, and you're adequately insured, right? We want to make sure you're adequately insured. If you have high credit card debt, oh, this is a no-brainer. Pay off the credit card debt. You can always run the bubonic plague of personal finance back up again if you needed to. But everyone's different. Check out The Wealthy Barber. It's in the bibliography. It's a great book. It's out of date in terms of the numbers, but the concepts are timely. Slide 67. Okay, time for checking for comprehension. Got your ABCDs out? What are mutual funds that pool the capital of a large number of investors and use it to invest exclusively in short-term securities? Commercial paper, money market mutual funds, savings accounts, CDs, certificates of deposit. These are money market mutual funds. you're just going to hear the term money market. Money market mutual funds and their counterparts at banks and credit unions' money market accounts have rates close to CDs without the early withdrawal penalty, and they're super convenient. How about savings instruments in which funds must remain on deposit for a specified period? There's normally a penalty for early withdrawal. Right, these are CDs, certificates of deposit. If interest rates are going down, you can lock in a good rate, but you better hope you don't need the money until the CD matures. It's not the end of the world. I mean, it's not a big deal, but still, I don't like that penalty. I don't like when people penalize me. Slide 69. What are short-term unsecured promissory notes issued by corporations with very high credit standing, normally sold in $100,000 denominations? Commercial paper, corporate paper, and their cousins, bankers' acceptance notes, are normally only purchased by institutional investors such as money market mutual funds, pension funds, life insurance companies. Life insurance companies are often called the invisible bankers. And then slide number 70, what is a guaranteed demand account at a bank or credit union that normally pays little interest but will be offered with a toaster or waffle iron, which makes it all worthwhile? Yep. They don't do that. They used to. They used to say, come on down and we'll give you, put some money in your savings account, we'll give you a waffle iron. No comment. Again, if you need the money in the short term, yeah, you got to put it here, okay, but not for long-term investors. They haven't taken they need to take BUS123, Introduction to Investments. Slide 71. Now, a question we often get is, well, who controls short-term rates? And it turns out that short-term rates, not long-term rates, we're going to see long-term rates when we get to bonds later on, they're controlled by the marketplace. But the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States and other central banks in other economies are responsible for setting short-term rates. Now, who is the Federal Reserve Bank? What is the Federal Reserve Board? They're the banker's bank. They're sitting behind the banking system. And they have two mandates. Their job is to encourage full employment and keep inflation in check. Now, these are diametrically opposed. The idea of encouraging full employment means, hey, we want everyone working, we want to produce as much goods and services as we can and build our wealth to the greatest extent. At the same time, we don't want inflation to get out of control. So you see, their job is to make sure there's enough money in this system so that we can encourage full employment, but not too much so that you have too many dollars chasing too few goods. Now, I'm not an economics professor. What do you get when you teach a parrot to say supply and demand, supply and demand? You get a learned economist. Okay, don't worry. We're going to insult everybody by the end of the semester. But economics is a very important tool that we in the modern world have, but we don't call it the dismal science for nothing. So if you want to dig more deeply into this, go talk to your economics professor, because economics to me is just so, they call it macro. It's so divorced from people's individual lives. On a very real issue, though, is it's not the choices and the decisions that these people at the Fed and other economists make. They affect all of us, but they're so esoteric for most of us to worry about. But if you are so inclined, all you got to do is type in Federal Reserve Bank, and you'll see all kinds of articles and the like about how they're doing a great job, how they're doing an awful job. The whole idea behind the Fed. When people start to learn about the Fed, they get kind of angry because there's really not a whole lot of oversight. They have to go to the Congress I forget how often, 4 months, 6 months, or whatever, and they've got to testify in front of Congress. But basically, it's a hands-off approach. They really are designed to be independent and not subject to political pressures. That's the goal, right? But that's not what often happens. Often the president will say, "We want the Fed to be independent." Meanwhile, they're calling them up and screaming and hollering at them because they're not happy with what they did. One such situation was just recently with Trump. He was not happy when the Fed started raising rates in 2018, 19 because the economy was doing better, right? But he did want the Federal Reserve to raise rates when Obama was president back in 2014. So the political, what is politics? Poly means many and ticks are blood-sucking insects. So when inflation ticked up in 2022, all eyes moved to the Fed, and they have been aggressively raising short-term interest rates. Now, is this going to cause a recession? 2023, we're halfway through. We'll see. We'll see what's going to happen. We'll talk about the anticipation of a recession when we get to bonds. But there are many people who are saying, the Fed's doing actually a pretty darn good job, and we might just skate through without a recession. I don't believe it. Doesn't mean I'm right, folks. Doesn't mean I'm wrong. That's why they call it the future. But if you're so inclined, take an economics course, and you'll see how much different it is. We're very practical, individual investors making individual situations, sometimes called the micro, and the economists are thinking about the macro, the larger picture. Cool. And the Fed, by the way, has 300. Last I heard, 300 PhD economists on their payroll. And I love when people scream and holler, "Oh, the Fed and the Fed, they're banksters, they're crooks." And yeah, you could do a better job. Yeah, right. Slide 72. Woohoo! And so we are finished with chapter 1. Introduction. What is an investment? Overview of the investment universe. And then the eternal struggle between risk and return. And then we snuck in short-term investments in there. They're not that tricky. They're pretty boring, and that's important. They're supposed to be boring. Your assignments are to go out and do some research. Find some short-term investments at banks, at credit unions, money market, mutual funds, and treasury bills, and then find some information on treasurydirect.gov. As we say in the commentary, the information is not as important as the process. And it's going to be a little boring, my apologies, but it's supposed to be boring. Don't worry, we get the mutual funds, and then after mutual fund stocks, it's going to get far more exciting because next chapter, coming up next, are mutual funds, investments for the masses. Very important. Are you excited? I hope so. I certainly am. Thank you so much for being in our class. All of us at Southwestern Community College are grateful, honored, privileged, and very happy that you're with us. Be awesome, dear students, and remember, we want you to be rich.